The stone stairs descend through the church floor and the air changes immediately. Temperature drops. You feel it in your hands first, then across your face. The pressure in your ears shifts. The air becomes heavier, wetter, completely still. There's a particular silence in sealed limestone, a silence that presses rather than soothes. It's the silence of weight and depth, and something that's been holding itself steady for centuries. Why does every major church crypt built before the 12th century maintain a temperature within 1 or 2 degrees year-round? The same thermal band modern physiologists identify as the range in which the human body's inflammatory response measurably decreases. And why does every 19th century health inspector's report documenting the closure of church crypts survive in complete official detail? While not a single design document from any medieval builder explains why crypts were built to the precise depths and dimensions that produce those conditions. Prior Benedict of Canterbury was a monk appointed in the 1170s to sit at Thomas Becket's tomb in the crypt and record what happened to the people who came. He was skeptical. He interrogated pilgrims, filtered fabrication, recorded only what he could corroborate. Over 10 years, he documented 703 miracles. The majority were physical cures. In 1171 alone, 100,000 people came to that crypt. The conditions inside the crypt, the sealed stone, the constant temperature, the compressed humid air, are not mentioned in his documentation, only the outcomes. Beginning in the 1850s, Victorian sanitary reformers began closing church crypts across England and the United States. Their reports survive. By April 1854, over 50 church vaults in England had been officially sealed. The reports described the humidity as dangerous, the sealed air as a health hazard. The atmospheric conditions they cited as reasons for closure are the same conditions modern physical therapy facilities maintain for respiratory recovery. The miasma theory they used to justify the sealing has since been entirely abandoned by science. The physical conditions these spaces produced have documented physiological effects. The record of their systematic sealing survives. The documentation of why they were originally engineered to produce those conditions does not exist. That is the conflict. That is what this video addresses. If you enjoy these stories, then support the channel by liking and subscribing. Thank you. Church crypts were built as sacred burial spaces, housing the remains of saints and important clergy, storing holy relics, providing a protected underground chapel for private worship. The proximity to saintly remains was theologically significant. The closer a supplicant could get to the body of a saint, the more likely the saint's intercession would be effective. The crypt was the holiest underground room in Christendom, darker, more enclosed, more immediate than the church above it. Healing happened there, and the church's explanation was straightforward. God answered prayers made in proximity to the bones of the saints. This is the official account. It is internally consistent. It has been reproduced in religious and architectural history across 2 centuries without serious revision. More medieval builders even engineered crypts specifically for pilgrim circulation. Stone passageways fitted with niches, routes that moved hundreds of bodies through a confined underground space efficiently. The architecture was built to accommodate the living, not just to house the dead. The architectural evidence does not fit neatly inside that framework. The number of surviving crypts is substantial, their dimensions consistent, their construction depths deliberate. The evidence types are straightforward: atmospheric measurements of surviving spaces, architectural analysis of known construction depths, documented records of visitor outcomes, and the precise administrative records of 19th century closure procedures. Underground limestone chambers maintain a temperature of 10 to 12 degrees Celsius year-round, regardless of external conditions, winter or summer, drought or flood. The thermal mass of surrounding rock prevents fluctuation. The humidity stabilizes between 85 and 95%. Negative ion concentration in underground stone chambers is significantly elevated relative to above-ground spaces. These are not assertions. They are measurable geological properties of enclosed limestone vaults. Modern physiological research has identified this thermal band as significant. The human body's inflammatory response, the mechanism involved in chronic pain, respiratory distress, fever, measurably decreases in sustained exposure to temperatures between 10 and 13 degrees. The specific humidity range of 85 to 95% is maintained in modern respiratory rehabilitation facilities for patients recovering from lung conditions. These are not metaphors. These are matching conditions. Medieval crypt builders chose their construction depths deliberately. The depth of the major healing crypts, Canterbury, Winchester, Worcester, Ely, clusters within a specific range. Shallower construction would have produced warmer temperatures and lower humidity. Deeper would have increased groundwater risk without corresponding benefit. The chosen depth is the depth that produces the specific conditions. That depth was a decision. But here is where it stops being about architecture. A sealed stone vault with low vaulted ceilings, arched walls, and a stone floor produces a specific acoustic profile. In a confined underground chamber of the dimensions common to pre-12th century crypts, the resonant frequency clusters in the low range, the same frequency range shown to affect brain state, reduce cortisol, and slow respiratory rates. At sustained exposure, low-frequency resonance reduces the activation of the prefrontal cortex, the same mechanism the UCLA researchers identified in cathedral acoustics at 110 Hz. In a smaller, sealed underground vault, the effect concentrates. The body of someone lying still in that space, in low light, is receiving that frequency through the stone as much as through the air. The chant performed in crypts was lower register than the chant performed in the nave above. The Office of the Dead, sung by monks in the crypt, at night, over several hours, used the lowest available voice registers. The acoustic signature of the space and the acoustic signature of the chant were matched. Not coincidentally, the monks who designed the chant and the monks who built the crypt were the same community. They worked in the same space. They knew what the space sounded like. Now look at this carefully, because the next detail is the part most historians walk past. Incubation, the practice of sleeping in a sacred space in order to receive healing, is documented from ancient Greek medical practice at the Asclepion temples through the early Christian period and into the medieval centuries without interruption. The theological framing changed. Greek suppliants slept to receive a vision from Asclepius. Christian pilgrims slept to receive the intercession of a saint. The physical practice did not change. Specifically in crypts, pilgrims did not merely visit, they stayed. They slept on the stone floor. They remained in the space for extended periods, sometimes multiple nights. The duration of exposure was documented separately from mere visitation in shrine records. Prior Benedict's records at Canterbury are the most detailed surviving account of what happened to people in a specific crypt over a sustained period. He was not a credulous recorder. He dismissed claims he could not verify. He cross-referenced accounts. He distinguished between pilgrims who had visited briefly and those who had remained in the crypt for extended periods. The extended stay pilgrims produced a higher proportion of the recorded physical recoveries. He wrote the outcomes down. He did not write down the conditions: the temperature of the stone floor on which people slept, the humidity in the sealed vault, the acoustic profile of the low vaulted space filled with low chant. These are not in his record. He recorded what happened. He did not record why. 703 miracles documented, 100,000 visitors in a single year. The most careful recorder in the medieval church sitting in that crypt, writing down what he found. And not one word about the cold of the stone, the quality of the air, the particular resonance of the vault. Here is the part which should genuinely stop you. 3 separate bodies of evidence: atmospheric conditions, acoustic profile, documented recovery rates, all pointing at the same anomaly. The physical conditions of the crypt produced measurable effects on the human body. The official account of what crypts were for contains none of this. The official account is theological. The physical evidence is physiological. Those two explanations cannot both be complete. Winchester Cathedral Crypt is one of the oldest surviving medieval crypts in England. It floods regularly. The water table beneath Winchester rises seasonally, and the crypt fills with water for months at a time. The medieval builders knew this. They could observe the water table at construction. They built the crypt at that depth anyway. They rebuilt it at the same depth when sections collapsed. They maintained the depth through repeated flooding events across centuries. The depth that causes the flooding is the depth that produces the atmospheric conditions. A crypt built 3 feet shallower would stay dry. It would also be warmer, less humid. The negative ion count would be lower. The builders chose the flooded depth, the dimensions of the crypt vaults, the ceiling height, the span of the arches, the width of the passages, determine the acoustic resonant frequency of the space. These dimensions are consistent across the major English healing crypts to within a narrow range. They were not standardized by any written code. There is no surviving document specifying that crypt dimensions should fall within particular acoustic parameters. The consistency is in the stone, not in the records. Here is the part that will change how you look at every church you've ever walked past. By the 1850s, the sanitary reform movement in England and the United States had identified enclosed underground spaces as disease sources. Miasma theory, the belief that bad air caused disease, was at its intellectual peak. The enclosed, humid, cool air of church crypts fit the miasma description precisely. It was damp. It was sealed. It smelled of stone and moisture. The reformers classified it as dangerous. In England, the Burial Act of 1857 gave authorities the power to close church vaults. By April 1854, 3 years before the act formally passed, over 50 church vaults had already been administratively sealed. The closure orders survive. They are detailed, crypt by crypt, church by church, each one documented with the inspector's name, the date of inspection, the grounds for closure, the humidity levels cited, the atmospheric conditions described as hazardous, the miasma theory used to justify each sealing. The miasma theory was abandoned by the scientific community by the 1880s, replaced by germ theory. The crypts remained sealed. The reason for sealing had been scientifically discredited within decades of the sealing. The crypts did not reopen. Here is what should genuinely trouble you about those closure reports. They described the conditions of the crypts in careful detail: the humidity, the temperature, the sealed atmosphere. They were wrong about what those conditions caused, but they were accurate about what those conditions were. The conditions they documented as dangerous are the conditions that modern physiological research identifies as therapeutically significant. The inspectors sealed the healing chambers using a theory that no longer exists. And here is what should trouble you about what happened next. If you've made it this far, you now know more than 99% of people. But the deeper problem is what happened to the crypts after they were sealed. After sealing, many crypts were converted, used as vestries, storage spaces, maintenance areas. Heating systems were installed in some. Air circulation was modified. The original atmospheric conditions, the stable temperature, the specific humidity, the acoustic signature, were permanently altered. Not by malice, by bureaucratic repurposing. The conversion records survive. The original design rationale does not. This pattern is not confined to England, Canterbury, Winchester, Worcester, Ely, St. Albans. The same architectural profile, the same atmospheric conditions, the same documented healing traffic, the same 19th century administrative sealing. The crypt of Saint-Eutrope in Saintes, France, one of the largest surviving Romanesque crypts in Europe, drew documented healing pilgrims from across the southwest of France through the 12th century. Its construction depth, vault dimensions, and an atmospheric profile matched the English healing crypts precisely. It was sealed during the French sanitary reform movement of the 1850s and converted to storage. In Germany, the crypt of Speyer Cathedral, built in the 11th century, shows the same pattern. Documented pilgrimage healing traffic, consistent construction depth, sealed in the 19th century on sanitary grounds. 3 countries, 3 independent reform movements, the same crypts, the same logic, the same result. Independent researchers in environmental physiology, acoustic archaeology, and medieval medical history have each examined aspects of this pattern without access to each other's work. Each arrived at the same anomaly. The spaces consistently associated with documented healing outcomes share specific measurable physical characteristics that the official theological explanation neither accounts for nor mentions. Stay with me here, because this last piece is the one that doesn't resolve. The closure orders for church crypts are detailed, official, and comprehensive. The medieval miracle records are detailed, specifically attributed, and carefully filtered by skeptical recorders like Benedict. The builder's rationale, The document that would explain why the crypts were designed to produce the conditions they produced does not exist. Not because it was suppressed or destroyed. Because the knowledge of why those dimensions worked was transmitted within monastic communities through practice and repetition. It was not written because it did not need to be written. It was lived knowledge, and when the communities dissolved, or when the spaces were sealed, the knowledge dissolved with them. This is not an argument that medieval monks were running underground medical clinics while telling pilgrims it was miracle work. What the evidence shows is narrower than that and harder to dismiss. Church crypts were built to produce specific physical conditions. Those conditions had documented physiological effects on the people who spent extended time in them. The record of their systematic sealing survives in precise administrative detail. The record of why they were originally built to those specifications does not exist. The sealing was justified by a scientific theory that collapsed within decades. The crypts did not reopen. That sequence of events has a shape. Prior Benedict sat in the Canterbury crypt in the 1170s. The stone floor was cold under him. The air was heavy and still. The low vault pressed down above the tomb. He had a record book. He was there to write down what happened to the people who came. He wrote down the outcomes. He wrote nothing about the cold of the stone, the quality of the air, the particular resonance of the vault. He would not have known there was anything worth noting. He recorded what he could observe. What he could not observe was why it worked. The crypts are still there. The stone is still there. The depth has not changed. Some are accessible to visitors now. Roped off, lit with fluorescent strips, are maintained at whatever temperature the building's heating system produces. The sealed atmospheric conditions are gone. The specific humidity is gone. The acoustic signature of the space has been altered by ventilation systems and foot traffic. You can stand in them, but you cannot stand in what they were. The closure orders are in the archive. The inspectors' names are legible. The dates are there. The miracle records are there, 703 of them from Canterbury alone, each one attributed, each one cross-checked by a skeptical monk who sat in the cold of that vault and wrote down what he could not explain. Something specific happened in those rooms. The records of their sealing are complete. The records of why they were built are not.